This is St Pancras Church back at the turn of the 18th to 19th centuries. The new St Pancras Church, the one diagonally opposite Euston Station, was still half a century from being built at this time, so this one hadn't yet become St Pancras Old Church. In those days, before the arrival of the railways, this was a functioning graveyard. It's the site, for instance, of the grave robber scene in A Tale of Two Cities. The church was welcoming towards the Catholic and dissident population in the community, and with the area being just outside the built-up environs of the city, it was what could perhaps be described as a liminal space, which is why it attracted a large community of free thinkers and a notable immigrant population. The writers I'm going to focus on here are from two influential families. Firstly, the Godwin-Wollstonecraft-Shelley clan, and secondly, the Polidori-Rossetti family. Both families promoted radical politics, and both have had a major influence on literary culture. And the key members of both families are closely tied to St Pancras Church and churchyard. William Godwin, philosopher, novelist and proto-anarchist, and Mary Wollstonecraft, feminist thinker and novelist, were married in the church and buried in the churchyard. Their daughter, Mary Shelley, author of Frankenstein, spent a great deal of her adolescence visiting her mother's grave, which was also the site for trysts with her future husband, Percy Bysshe Shelley. John Polidori, author of The Vampire, the first modern vampire novel, published 80 years before Dracula, was also buried in the churchyard. Polidori's sister Frances married Gabriella Rossetti, and they had 4 children. The daughters of one of these children later started an anarchist journal, The Torch. So how might the place have influenced the radical politics and Gothic writings of the two families? And what trace is left of that sense of place now? We can start back in the mid-19th century, when the churchyard ceased being a working graveyard and was turned into a park. This happened as a result of the construction of the railways and the need to clear the surrounding area for them. Up until 2022, there used to be a tree in the churchyard, surrounded by old gravestones. Unfortunately, it was blown over in a storm last year. It was known as the Hardy Tree, after the novelist and poet Thomas Hardy, who, prior to his literary career, worked on the clearing of the graveyard, exhuming thousands of corpses and stacking old gravestones around this tree. One of the graves, which was removed as part of this process, was John Polidori's, and today there's no trace or commemoration of him left in the churchyard at all, which is either ironic or fitting for someone who had such an important, although fairly uncelebrated, influence on literature about the undead. Amongst the few graves that do still exist is the Godwin-Wollstonecraft Memorial, although their bodies are no longer interred there, as they were moved down to the Shelley family plot in Bournemouth by their grandson. Throughout its history, tens of hundreds of people were buried here, and after the mass exhumations, a memorial sundial was put up to remember many of the more notable names. Today, the place is hugely transformed from how it was at the turn of the 18th to 19th centuries. There are still traces of that era. The buildings of what used to be the St Pancras Workhouse loom over the north side of the churchyard. And throughout much of its history, right up until the recent regeneration projects, the place has still attracted a community which is a mixture of the marginalised and the radical.